He didn't believe in ghosts. But that night, something made Weston Cade look back. The lantern in his calloused hand cast a dim circle on the ground as he crossed the edge of the overgrown graveyard. Same way he'd done every week for 2 years. Same boots. Same silence. Same knot in his throat he never could swallow. Only now, it wasn't silence. It was breath. Shallow. Trembling. Human. The kind that didn't belong in a graveyard past midnight. He turned slowly, instinct sharper than fear. At the far end, where the stone read Micah Cade, beloved son, a shape hunched low. Not lying flat, but curled like a child clinging to warmth. Weston's first thought was animal. Second was beggar. Third stopped him still. Girl. She couldn't have been more than 20. Face turned sideways on the stone, arms wrapped around her belly. Bare feet streaked with mud, brown hair tangled across her jaw like the weeds around her. A threadbare shawl barely covered her shoulders. And beneath that shawl, a belly full and round, near birthing. He didn't speak. Just stood there in the breathless dark, the lantern casting long shadows across the headstone. What kind of girl sleeps on a grave? He stepped closer, slow. The dry grass crackled under his boot, and she stirred, not fully waking, but flinching, the way strays do when they expect a blow. Her lips moved, barely audible. "Don't take me back." Weston froze. His heart made an old familiar ache, same place it used to burn when his boy cried in fevers. He crouched without thinking. Up close, she looked worse. Hollow cheeks. Cracked hands. Faded bruises along her jaw. But her arms held her stomach like something sacred. He looked down at the stone under her. His son's. She was sleeping on the only thing Weston hadn't been able to bury right. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat, heavy canvas, still warm from his body, and draped it over her. She didn't wake. Just clutched it like a child, breathing softer. He stood again. Turned to leave. But something in him twisted. Not a thought. Not a plan. Just that same ache. And so, he turned back. With both arms, he lifted her like driftwood, light, too light, and walked out of the graveyard. No one saw him, but the moon followed, pale and watching. By the time the sky lightened to gray, folks were stirring in town. Weston didn't knock on doors. He didn't explain. He just passed silently, barefoot girl in arms, her belly rising against his chest with every breath. Miss Corinne Hatch peered out from her porch, mouth puckered like a lemon. "Lord preserve," she muttered. "Cade's gone soft for some tramp." A boy at the water pump whispered, "Is she dead?" His father hushed him, eyes wary. But Weston kept walking. He laid her on the cot by the hearth, still wrapped in his coat. The fire had died sometime in the night, so he lit it again, slow and practiced. When it caught, he sat down across from her, arms on knees, back bowed like the wind had worn him hollow. She didn't wake till noon. When she did, her eyes opened slow and foggy. She blinked at the light on the log walls, at the ticking clock, the stitched blanket tucked around her. Then at the tall man sitting silent with a mug of black coffee. She tried to sit up. Winced. Didn't speak. Weston nodded once. Slight. "You're safe." Her mouth worked, then failed. She looked toward the door. "Is he here?" He furrowed his brow. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "The man with the knife." Something in Weston's jaw ticked, but he said nothing. Just stood, fetched a chipped mug, poured half of his own coffee into it, and set it beside her with a chunk of bread and butter. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "I didn't mean to sleep there." "On him." Weston paused. "You knew." She nodded faintly. "I saw his name carved. And your boots beside it yesterday." Her gaze dropped. "Figured you wouldn't come at night." He didn't reply. The clock ticked loud between them. "I ain't lookin' for pity," she said, voice rough. "Just needed to stop runnin' long enough to feel human again." Weston stood. Eek. He didn't ask for her name. Didn't ask where she came from, or who she was running from. He just stepped outside to split firewood, the door clicking behind him. She took a bite of bread. Tears slid down her cheeks without permission. That evening, Hazel Ruth Monroe sat by Weston's hearth, her body sore and heavy, but warm. She traced the stitching on the blanket and watched the flames reflect in the window. Outside, the rain had started again, quiet and steady, like it knew secrets and never asked questions. And just as she began to drift again, she noticed something by the foot of the cot. An old wooden carving. A tiny horse with broken legs, one of them glued. She picked it up slowly, staring at the smooth whittled edges, the tiny initials MC on the underside. It wasn't hers. It wasn't recent. But somehow, it had found her. She clutched it to her chest, closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, slept without dreaming. Until a knock came at the door. 3 slow raps. Weston opened it, and Sheriff Granger stepped in with mud on his boots and a folded paper in hand. "You picked up trouble, Cade," he said, voice low. "And I got questions. About the girl who sleeps on graves." Hazel watched the butter melt on the biscuit, too ashamed to meet Weston's eyes. She hadn't spoken since the sheriff left. Her hands trembled when she held the cup, porcelain chipped, clean. Everything in his house was clean. Quiet, too, like grief had swept through and scrubbed away sound. Weston moved around her with the weight of a man who never hurried. He set a pail by the door, washed his hands without looking at her, then stepped outside to split more wood. His silence wasn't cruel. It was careful, like every word had to be earned. Like he didn't want to ask what she couldn't yet say. She listened to the rhythmic thud of his axe while the fire popped beside her. On the mantel, a single photograph sat in a cracked frame. A boy with Weston's eyes, holding a slingshot and smiling with too much sun in his face. Hazel looked away quickly, as if it burned. In town, the story was already boiling over. Corinne Hatch stood at the mercantile with her shawl clutched high and her lips lower. "I saw him carry her," she said to no one and everyone. "Right through Main Street, bold as daylight. Girls no better than gutter soot, far as I can tell." "Pregnant too," replied Mr. Link from the feed store, stacking flour sacks. "Poor fool must have gone mad since his boy died." Even the preacher's wife nodded. "There's something not right about her. Like she walked out of a grave herself." By sundown, Hazel's name had changed 3 times in whispers: thief, harlot, runaway. But Hazel had not yet spoken her name aloud in Weston's house. The next morning, Weston laid out clean linen and a pair of boots. Not new, but stitched and soft. He placed them by the fire, said nothing. Hazel stared at them as if they were made of gold. "I ain't lookin' to stay," she murmured. "You hungry?" She nodded. "Then stay till you ain't." He walked outside again, leaving her alone with a choice she couldn't explain: run with an empty belly, or stay with a man who asked for nothing. By the 3rd day, she was sweeping his porch with quiet diligence, her belly shifting beneath her dress like a burden she no longer tried to hide. She found a bent spoon in the garden soil and washed it back to silver. But even inside Weston's quiet, the town seeped in. Children stared when she passed. A girl no older than 8 pointed and whispered to her mother, "Is that the grave lady?" The postmaster glanced sideways and said, "You gettin' mail for her now, Cade?" Weston didn't answer, just took his parcel and walked out. Hazel felt it on her skin like a rash. The watching, the silence broken by coughs meant to hurt. Her walk back to the cabin became slower each time. That night, she stared at Weston across the table. He was eating stew in slow scoops, eyes on his bowl, not her. "I tried to sleep in the woods last week," she said suddenly. "Woke up with ants on my legs and a wolf watching me." He didn't flinch. She added, "I think I dreamed about your boy." Didn't see his face. Just felt him. Like he was waitin'. Weston paused, spoon still midair. "He would have helped you," he said simply. Hazel blinked. "Do you think he sent me?" "I think someone did." Her chest tightened, but she nodded. "I didn't mean to stay this long." "Then don't mean to leave," he said, and returned to his stew. In that moment, something broke inside her, not loudly, but clean, like frost cracking beneath boots. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked into the fire. For the first time, she didn't feel like a trespasser. But not everyone forgave the living for surviving. Sheriff Granger returned with questions, not the kind that asked, but the kind that pressed. He stood on Weston's porch, hat in hand, badge shining like an accusation. "Girls from Dry Hollow," he said, "may have trouble behind her. Some say she stole from her kin." Weston didn't move. "Kin ain't always right." Sheriff's jaw tightened. "Just sayin', if you're harboring trouble, you'll be answerin' for it. Law don't bend for ghosts or good intentions." Inside, Hazel heard every word. That night, Weston returned late from the barn, his shoulders dusted in hay, his boots dragging. He found Hazel sitting outside on the porch step, hands folded over her belly like a prayer. "I don't want to bring shame on you," she said. "I can go. I've slept colder." He sat beside her. Didn't look at her. "My boy's grave was cold. Then you warmed it." She didn't reply, but she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, one of Weston's old nails from the shed, twisted gently into the shape of a bird. "I found it near your fence line," she said. "Didn't mean to keep it. Just felt like it belonged to someone." He took it carefully, studied it. "You made this." She nodded. "Keep it." The wind picked up, soft and aching. From the edge of town, someone watched through a spyglass, then folded the warrant in his coat. Tomorrow, he'd return with questions and chains. The sheriff's office smelled like pipe smoke and damp paper. Sheriff Granger sat behind the desk, flipping a folded telegram between his fingers. He'd read it 5 times already, and each time, the ending tasted better. Pregnant girl matching description fled Dry Hollow. Wounded man claims attempted murder. Suspect believed headed east. Bounty pending. He grinned slowly. Weston Cade, silent widower turned savior. The town might pity him, but Granger remembered the man Weston used to be, sharp-eyed, faster than talk, full of fire and fists. The kind of man who didn't bow. Now he was bowing to some girl with belly and secrets. Sheriff tucked the paper into his breast pocket, rose slowly, and walked to the window. The rain had eased. Cade's land was a ride away, and this time he wouldn't come with words alone. At the cabin, Hazel moved carefully through the garden rows, barefoot on the damp earth. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy with dew. She bent slowly, picking dandelion greens with a focus that made her forget who she used to be. Each root in her hand felt like proof. She could be useful. She could grow things. Weston watched her from the barn, one hand resting on the half-sanded cradle he'd been working on. The wood had been Micah's, salvaged from the bed he built for his son when he turned 10. Weston couldn't make himself burn it. Now, it would hold a different life. He didn't ask why Hazel worked the garden like it was her penance. He didn't ask why she never mentioned a family name or why she flinched when Boots scuffed too near. But he saw the way her eyes searched corners, the way her hand hovered protectively over her stomach even in sleep. Weston knew what haunted looked like. That afternoon, Doc Mays arrived on his sway-backed mule. Hazel froze on the porch when she saw him. White beard, long coat, medical satchel like a hanging weight. "I come as a friend," he said gently, dismounting. "You look like you're carryin' the world in that belly." Hazel didn't answer, but she let him in. Weston stood nearby, arms folded. The doc examined her with soft hands and sharper eyes. "She's strong," Doc said after a time. "Too strong. Looks like she ain't let herself rest in months." Hazel looked away. Doc packed up and turned to Weston. "Let her be still. Let her eat. Whatever's chasing her, it ain't faster than birth." Hazel closed her eyes at that, at the finality of it. After the doctor left, Weston went back to carving. Hazel sat at the hearth, tracing the lines on her palms like they might give her a new name. The firelight flickered over the cradle's smooth curve. She whispered, "Was it for him?" Weston didn't look up. "It was." She nodded, then asked quietly, "Why build again?" He smoothed a knot in the wood. Because you're here. She wanted to cry, but didn't. Instead, she reached into her skirt pocket and drew out a small bundle of thread she'd salvaged from a coat sleeve. I could sew something for it, she offered. For the baby. He only nodded. But in that nod, something opened. That night, while Weston slept, Hazel walked outside into the darkness and sat by Micah's grave. The wind moved gently, carrying leaves across her feet. She rested a hand on the stone and whispered things she hadn't said aloud in months. Her name, her guilt, her hopes. The next morning, Sheriff Granger arrived at the post office in town, pulled out the telegram, and nailed it to the bulletin board beside the church schedule and the flower sale flyer. Miss Hatch saw it first. Her gasp was audible down the block. Girl wanted for assault, she read aloud. Could be dangerous. Reward offered. Her eyes glinted. Within hours, it was everywhere. At the saloon, men grumbled. So Cade's hidin' a killer? At the barber's, someone muttered. Wouldn't be the first outlaw woman with a pretty face. Even the preacher asked if Weston needed prayers or caution. Sheriff Granger saddled up and took 2 deputies with him. When they arrived, Hazel was mending a blanket on the porch. Weston was oiling the hinges on the barn door. The moment they saw the horses, Hazel stood too fast and dropped the thread. Sheriff dismounted with theatrical slowness. Cade, we need a word. Weston said nothing, just straightened and waited. Granger held up the paper like scripture. You got a girl on your land. She's wanted in Dry Hollow. Wounded a man, they say. Hazel stepped forward, face pale. He tried to. Granger cut her off. That's for a judge to hear, not a porch. Weston's voice came low. She's not going anywhere today. Granger squinted. You harborin' her, Cade? That a confession. I'm feeding her, sheltering her. Call it what you want. The 2 men locked eyes, and for a second, it felt like 20 years ago, when Weston stood between a miner and his daughter at gunpoint. She comes with me, Granger said. No, Weston replied. Hazel's breath hitched. Her hands clenched the worn porch rail. The deputies shifted uneasily. Granger's tone cooled. You know what this means. Weston gave a slow nod. I do. He stepped between Hazel and the sheriff, broad shoulders squared, a quiet wall. Granger backed off, but his smirk lingered. Don't say I didn't give you the chance. They rode off. Hazel stood trembling. I told you I'd leave. Now You stay, Weston said. And then he did something he hadn't done since his wife died. He opened a drawer, pulled out an old silver ring, and set it on the table. No words. Just the gesture. Hazel stared at it, her throat tight. Outside in town, the preacher lit the church lamps early. The sheriff was already writing his next telegram. This one said, Preparing warrant. Return with chains. The church bell rang twice that morning. Once for the hour, once for gossip. Hazel walked alone through town, her boots too big for her feet, her belly a full curve beneath Weston's old coat. Heads turned before she passed. They weren't loud. Just whispers. But whispers could bleed you dry quicker than any bullet. That's her, someone murmured near the feed store. Poor Weston's gone soft in the head, said a woman in a bonnet, not bothering to lower her voice. Hazel kept walking. She had come for thread and sugar, though her hands trembled too much to hold the coins. At the general store, Mr. Laird served her stiffly, eyes flicking toward the sheriff's notice still nailed by the door. She didn't ask for paper to wrap the sugar. Just carried it in her palms, the grains spilling like tiny betrayals. On her way back, she passed the church. The pastor stepped out, tipped his hat without smiling. You still expecting kindness, said Miss Hatch from her bench near the steps. Best you go confess to someone. Law's coming for you. Hazel met her eyes. I already did. Miss Hatch blinked, unsure whether it was a threat or a prayer. Back at the cabin, Weston was splitting firewood like the axe owed him something. Hazel said nothing as she passed him, but when she entered the kitchen, she set the sugar down with care, as if that, at least, could still be right. By afternoon, she sat beside the grave again. The earth was still soft from spring thaw. The stone read Micah Cade, and now, beside it, a flat river stone had been scrubbed clean and set gently in the grass. Nothing carved. Just a placeholder. Like she was being allowed to exist, but not yet belong. Hazel touched the smooth surface and whispered, "I didn't kill him." The wind stirred the wildflowers. Weston's steps crunched behind her. "He had a knife," she said without turning. "Said if I didn't lie down quiet, he'd cut the baby out and blame wolves." Weston stood still. "I stabbed him with a fire poker. Didn't think. Just moved." She turned to face him. "I ran. My uncle was gonna trade me for seed money anyway." Sheriff in Dry Hollow didn't ask questions. Weston's eyes didn't change. Just softened, like leather warming in sun. "I'd understand if you don't want. I already built the cradle," he said. Hazel blinked. "You believe me? I've seen liars. You don't move like them." For a moment, silence held them both. Then she nodded, slowly. That evening, she hemmed a cloth for the cradle, stitching small vines into the border. Weston brought her tea without asking. She took it without thanks. Gratitude had grown quiet between them, less a word, more a rhythm. But peace didn't last in a town like theirs. The next morning, the sheriff arrived, not alone this time. 3 townsfolk stood behind him, Corinne Hatch, Pastor Elwell, and a younger man Hazel didn't recognize. Sheriff Granger held a piece of paper like it was a sacred torch. "Public hearing," he declared. "You've had your piece, Cade. Now the town wants answers." Weston stepped onto the porch. "This your trial?" "Don't need a judge to see what's plain," Miss Hatch said, chin high. "She brings shame. Trouble." Hazel appeared in the doorway, hands folded over her belly. "Then ask me what you came to ask." The pastor cleared his throat. "There are questions about the child, about the assault, about whether your presence here is, well, safe. I told your sheriff the truth. He didn't write it down. Do you deny harming a man in Dry Hollow?" Granger asked. "No," she said. "I harmed the man who meant to harm me." Miss Hatch sniffed. "And your uncle?" He said, "My uncle sold me. His word ain't scripture." A murmur rose. Weston stepped forward, jaw clenched. "She's not on trial. Not here. Not like this." Granger held up the paper again. "She's wanted. That's fact." "Not anymore," Weston said. And from his vest pocket, he pulled a folded slip, creased, signed, and stamped by the circuit clerk. He handed it to the pastor. Elwell read it aloud, voice uneven. "Marriage license. Weston Cade and Hazel Monroe, duly filed." The whispers fell to stunned silence. Miss Hatch paled. "You married her?" "She asked nothing of me," Weston said. "So I gave her my name. That's more than some give their own kin." Hazel's hand found the doorframe. Her breath came tight, eyes darting between them all. "She didn't ask," Miss Hatch spat. "She tricked." "She's my wife now," Weston cut in. "The law can't take what it didn't know how to keep." Granger looked like he'd swallowed dust. He nodded stiffly, turned, and left without another word. The others followed, slow and quiet, like children leaving a funeral. Hazel exhaled, knees shaking. Inside, Weston poured a glass of water and handed it to her. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said. He didn't touch her. Just sat nearby, watching the fire like it might tell him what came next. That night, the wind rose again, but the town was still. And across the porch, folded neatly beside the door, was the sheriff's warrant, torn in half. The sheriff's office door slammed so hard the wanted posters fluttered like frightened birds. Sheriff Granger paced in wide, angry strides, his spurs clinking against the floor. Behind him, Deputy Owen watched quietly, chewing on the inside of his cheek. The townsfolk hadn't backed the sheriff, not the way he expected. Weston Cade had done the unthinkable, claimed the girl as his wife. And worse, no one had stopped him. Granger yanked open the desk drawer, pulled out the telegram from Dry Hollow, and read it again as if the words might grow teeth. Stabbed a man, he muttered. Ran. Suspect believed dangerous. He crushed the paper in his fist. And now she's a wife. Just like that. Owen cleared his throat. Cade's got friends. He's quiet, but folks remember what he did during the flood. Built the bridge with his bare hands. Fed half the county. That don't matter when the law's clear, Granger snapped. You think a ring erases blood? Owen said nothing. Granger threw on his coat and stepped out into the gray morning. The town was already moving slow. Faces turned away when he passed. At the post office, the clerk avoided his eyes. At the church, Miss Hatch pretended to pray. No one had his back. Not anymore. Weston had changed the air. At the cabin, Hazel stood by the grave, one hand on her belly, the other resting on the smooth river stone beside Micah's. She had carved a single word into it the night before: hope. Not a name. Not a plea. Just the thing she'd once buried and now dared to raise again. Weston came from the field carrying a sack of feed. He said nothing as he passed her, but his glance held weight, a kind of quiet promise that didn't need language. Inside, Hazel stirred stew while the cradle waited by the hearth. The cloth she'd stitched into its lining was soft, trimmed in green vines. She'd embroidered a tiny bird in the corner, wings outstretched. She didn't know what kind, just knew it needed to fly. The knock came before noon. Not a polite one. A hard, 4-beat demand. Weston opened the door and met Granger's eyes without blinking. "This is your last warning," the sheriff said, voice cold as the sky. "I've got the full backing of Dry Hollow. The judge himself sent this." He waved another telegram like a flag of war. "You're harboring a fugitive. Marriage or not." Hazel stepped beside Weston before he could answer. "Then take me," she said. Weston's hand twitched. She reached for his fingers, stopped him. "No," she said gently. "Let me speak." Granger's jaw shifted. "Go on, then. Let's hear this miracle defense." Hazel stepped out onto the porch. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "You said I stabbed a man. I did. With the handle of a fire poker. I didn't mean to kill him, just stop him. He had me pinned against a wagon, told me he'd carve the baby out. I ran. And nobody in Dry Hollow cared. They listened to the man with land, not the girl with dirt on her feet." Granger narrowed his eyes. "That's not how they tell it. Then they can ride here and look me in the eye." She straightened. "I've told my truth. You want to drag a pregnant woman from the arms of her husband. You go ahead." She turned her face toward Weston, then back to Granger. "But you'll have to carry me like a corpse, because I won't walk." The silence that followed was thick. Even the birds seemed to pause. Behind Granger, the road had drawn watchers, quiet figures standing far back, as if the town itself had come to see who would yield. Doc Mays leaned against his wagon. Pastor Elwell stood by the church steps. Even Corinne Hatch peeked from behind her curtains. No one spoke, but none looked away. Granger's lip curled. "You think this speech makes you innocent?" "No," Hazel said. "But I'm not ashamed anymore." He turned back to Weston, who hadn't moved from the doorway. "You really want this fight?" Weston's voice came low. "Only if you insist on starting one." Granger stared at him a long moment, then looked back at Hazel. "You're just one girl. Don't think you've won." Hazel lifted her chin. "Then take that ring off my finger yourself." Granger's hand twitched, but he didn't move forward. He just crumpled the telegram in his palm and tossed it into the dirt. "Keep your cradle," he spat. "Let's see how long peace lasts." He walked back to his horse, jaw tight, boots heavy. He didn't look back. Not once. Weston turned to Hazel. "You shouldn't have done that." I needed to, she whispered. They stood together in the doorway as the watchers drifted away, leaving only wind and the sound of the trees exhaling. Later that evening, Hazel sat by the cradle, smoothing the edge of the blanket. Weston joined her, placing something small in her hand. It was a carving, a tiny bird with wings folded. She smiled softly. You made another? No, Weston said. Micah did. I found it in the wall, behind the headboard. I think he meant for someone to have it. Hazel closed her fingers around it. Then I'll give it to him. Weston's brows drew. To who? Hazel looked up. To our son. When he asks who his brother was. Weston didn't speak. He only knelt down beside the cradle, resting a hand on its edge. The fire cast their shadows long against the wall, one tall, one bowed, one growing inside her. In the sheriff's office, the door stayed closed for days. The bounty was never spoken of again. And in the graveyard, beneath the stone that bore Micah's name, flowers began to grow. No one planted them, but they came anyway. Like something lost, was finally letting go. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.